took 52,000 people, and they studied people with natural immunity versus the vaccination, and there was no difference. And our CDC, no one's talking about if you had COVID and your national immunity versus the vaccination, and your, your health, everybody's antibodies are acting differently. And
so
I feel like they totally ignored, the natural immunity.
So yeah, prior infection is always, and it's kind of has always been an important part of getting through any pandemic, I think, for them to not state that has been probably, to me, the way that a lot of, it makes me question the person that's saying it, because we've always known that natural immunity matters. And in all honesty, seeing the whole virus forming all the different proteins, or the proteins being exposed and causing you to form antibodies, gives you multiple lots. And in one way, why the vaccine itself is seeing breakthrough infection so quickly is because it is a very narrow vaccine. It is vaccinating you against one subunit of one protein. And it's, in the midst of a very complex disease that has a very high prevalence, that has rapid turnover in the community, vaccinating very narrowly is not necessarily the best thing. Now, I don't know whether it prevents serious disease. I think there is probably pretty good arguments that it does, but I will say natural infection, when you actually look at the data from Israel, they keep up with their recovered population, and their recovered population is the best at keeping away any serious disease, and as well as just infections in general. So.
I'm a critical care nurse at UAB, and the masks, that's the thing, and the treatment and everything, but we have an immune system that will fight infection. People that have, pre-existing conditions and are more susceptible, all of that. But we have an immune system that fights infection, as evidenced by I have had COVID twice. Where do you think I got it from?
Oh yeah.
Okay, twice. The only reason I knew I had it the second time was because I realized that I couldn't smell brownies cooking on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
And I still have issues with my smell going on. But that was my only symptom. And a doctor at UAB, an attending at hospital, will remain nameless, said, that is your immune system doing what it's supposed to after the first infection.
Yeah.
That was the only symptom I had, was I couldn't smell.
Yeah.
No cough, no fever, no lethargy, nothing that first time.
Yeah, and I would say that's the beautiful part about our immune systems. We're learning more and more about them every day. In fact, it's incredible. Even what probably I learned in med school, finishing in 2009, has been added to multiple systems that we didn't even know existed. It's almost like the deeper we get, the more complex it gets. And I think that's awesome.
Could you speak to this potentially being a more long-term issue than what we really are thinking about, possibly new variants, and the freedom that you mentioned to try things, to not try things, to not be forced to do things?
Yeah. So what I will say is India is doing a cool job in terms of after each wave they do a seroprevalence study, okay, in terms of what we call long-term. And so they actually just released 2 weeks ago, the Ministry of Health in India released their seroprevalence study. And it actually was the first time they actually did kids, and it was from the ages of 6 to 18. But they go to all 70 states of India. I think that's regional geography correct. And there's 70 different states in India, and I think 21 provinces. Anybody else in Indian stuff? So after the first wave they did, it was 0.7, which would have been like kind of that March, spring break from heck that all of y'all experienced. They did a seroprevalence study after that first wave, it was 0.7. The second one, which would have been a summer a year ago, was 7.1%. And then they did one after that December to February, is 24.1%. And then the one they just released from June to July was 67.6%. Now I will say Johns Hopkins says there's only been 30 million cases in India, or around 30 million. Well, you do the math. 67.6% times 1.4 billion, I think is 930 million. Anybody else? So they're only off by 900 million cases. And then they also did children, and so they did ages 6 to 18, and they were about just a little bit under 60%. So again, I think just like every other pandemic we've been through since man began, it comes in waves, and actually through each wave you get more seroprevalence, and so seroprevalence ends up being really the way it ends. And I think this fourth wave is, I can already tell you, at my clinics at least, we're seeing 3 to 4 times the cases we did in January. I will say the hospitalizations aren't 3 to 4 times where they were in January, which is an awesome thing. That is great. That is good.
More infectious, but not as deadly.
Yeah, and most viruses will mutate. I mean, there are times that a virus will, it's called what we call antigenic, really shift, but it has to be a multi-segmented DNA. It can't be something. It has to have a natural reservoir that we're around. And actually, anyway, there's a lot of. That's why influenza. Good God, we probably never heard of it because it has 8 segments. It's got pigs and birds. But coronavirus is a single segmented RNA strand, and it really can only do what we call drifting. And usually the goal of a virus is to transmit, okay? It is to replicate and transmit. And if you kill the host, there's not many people to spread it to anymore, okay? And so in general, most viruses that are single-stranded RNA viruses end up being much more infectious with time and much less deadly.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a great thing. The decoupling of hospitalizations from cases is a good thing. That's what I mean. So I'd say that is a promising thing because I compared it even with the hospitalizations because I was talking to Pappas the other day and they had 167 people in the UAB. And in January, it was like almost 500. And I showed Pappas my graph. I'm seeing like 5 times the amount of cases in January, right? And he's seeing 1/3 of the hospitalizations. That's a good thing. That's a great thing.
Get out,
Yeah.
First of all, are you 3 years away?
Yeah.
Okay, and.
I mean, as you can tell, I
I
can
didn't
talk
know.
about a lot.
Well, and maybe like 5 more minutes of questions, but I have a question. Talk about emergency use authorization versus if there are treatments available. My understanding is that, if they recognize readily available treatments for COVID, that they could not get the emergency use authorization for the vaccine. Is that why?
So the problem with the EUA is really only ever been used for medical therapies. And so it's never been used for a vaccine before. And so if they're kind of in a, because it would make sense that all of a sudden you had this better treatment for your cancer that you had. And suddenly that thing is available, you would want that. Because the other one would go away. And you'd say, well, that didn't really work to begin with. But that's how a typical EUA would happen. In this case, it's a vaccine that gets EUA. And it puts them in a little conundrum because the vaccine is still important out here, but it's based on the concept that there's no effective therapy. And that's not necessarily a good thing. It's kind of puts you in a, what's it called, a Hobbesian dilemma, where you try to you have 2 choices that are both not necessarily have great outcomes, but you pick the one that you think has the best overall outcome. And again, I'd much rather be like, well, why don't we try both? You know, again, sometimes the law and the FDA's approval limits thing. If they approve this, and that I could be completely wrong, but I imagine if they approve the vaccine, and soon, the therapies will start to hit quickly. And if they do, it kind of proves what you were talking about.
Yeah, so I guess I was wondering if that was part of why they're inhibiting like the ivermectin and different things.
Well, I will say, since the vaccine's developed, I don't think you've ever heard the NIH director mention treatments, and that's not necessarily a great thing.
I started 5 or something approved tomorrow.
Well, in that case,
That's
yeah, it's not a bad
2
thing.
years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I believe you mentioned this earlier, but I may have misheard you. I want to bring up the mask issue again. So my wife, she has, it's actually forced to wear a mask all day at work. She's mentioned it several times, like headaches that she gets. As soon as she takes it off, the headaches go away. Heard of several cases of kids that actually get headaches, dizziness, throwing up, that sort of thing. And this makes perfect sense to me. I also read an article that masks can restrict oxygen level intake by up to 20%. Also, breathing a mask, there's a lot of moisture that's trapped there, and surely some carbon dioxide is getting trapped and then taken back in. So, if it doesn't stop the virus, wouldn't it make perfect sense that your immune system is being weakened at the same time the viruses are getting through?
I mean, I don't know that you can make that argument but what I would say is there's more than just positive things with the mask. There's a lot of, every intervention that we have in medicine has negative consequences, some more than others. And it affects everybody differently. I mean, some people are mouth breathers, some people are nose breathers. I mean, some people wear glasses. You know, it's nuanced. And so I think, you know, even if you make an argument that something's effective, you also have to make the argument that these secondary externalities that it causes have to be nothing. So,
But you and I